Hey, this is Tom. Welcome back to my series on Bobby Fischer, Play the Najdorf Sicilian. In game two, we're going to look at the English attack variation. Before we jump in, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and also like this video. Really appreciate your support. So when I found the game that we're going to review today, I couldn't help but think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Specifically, the scene between Arthur and the knight in the woods. It's 1971. Here comes King Fischer walking into a chess club in Manhattan. And who stands in his way but his old punching bag, Robbie Byrne, who challenges him to a blitz game. Fischer's got bigger fish to fry. He's on the verge of playing Spassky, tells him to step aside. Byrne refuses, and Fischer says, "So be it. Prepared to die." And if you want to kill your opponent on the chessboard, the Najdorf variation will get the job done every time. Okay, so after e4, c5, Sicilian on the board, knight f3, d6, d4, cd, knight takes, so we're in the open Sicilian here, and after knight f6, knight c3, and a6, we reach the main position of the Najdorf. In our first game, we looked at the variation 6 bishop e2. So today, we're going to be looking at the move 6 bishop e3, which leads to the so-called English attack. Black should respond in standard Najdorf fashion, e5, boom, kicking this knight away. The knight is relegated to the b3 square. And after bishop e7, f3, castles, queen d2, bishop e6. Don't forget about this nice chunky bishop on e6. Guarding all these potentially weak light squares. White castles to the king side. Now, if you've seen the first video on 6 bishop e2, you remember that I said that the f pawn is kind of the what the f do I do pawn, right? That's because in those variations, white is castling to the king side, and this f pawn is really white's only source of counterplay in the position. And more times than not, this is to white's detriment. And these pawn moves, f3, f4, end up weakening the king in the long run. And most Najdorf players have a lot of experience taking advantage of that weakness. Here, it's a little bit different. f3 makes total sense for two reasons. Number one, we have the bishop on e3. So f3 does a really good job of preventing knight g4 and tickling this bishop. Okay. The other thing that f3 does is prepares the pawn thrust g4. Notice the battle lines have been drawn here. Okay. Fischer playing the Najdorf is on the king side. Robbie Byrne playing the English attack is on the white side, and he's castled to the queen side. So both players are going to start respective pawn storms to try to checkmate the enemy king. That's the main strategic plan in this position. So f3 does a nice job of starting that plan. After knight bd7, g4, b5, the one thing to notice about white's attack is this English setup is something that you would see similar in the Sicilian Dragon, but there is a huge difference here between the Najdorf and the Sicilian Dragon. In the Sicilian Dragon, okay, black has a pawn on g6, which is a hook, which allows white to play a move like h4, h5, capture, open the h-file, and generate a lot of play in the king side. Okay, so even though white's adopted a very similar setup structurally, the English attack looks a lot like the Yugoslav attack, if you're familiar with those openings. it's just not as effective because black doesn't have any weaknesses on the king side. So kind of like the knight in Monty Python, white always thinks he's doing better than he really is. Right? He thinks that he's still in the fight, but in actuality, black's the one that's having all the fun. So after g5, I want to stop here and turn it over to you. So white's got his counterplay going on the king side. The knight's attacked, so black should move it. What should black do with the knight in this position? Pause your video while I take a sip of water. Okay, so you might be inclined to bring the knight back to e8, knowing that knights on the rim are dim. I don't want to put my knight on the edge of the board. But Fischer shows really nice understanding in this position and knows when to violate rules such as this. So with this knight move, knight h5, really good move by Fischer. You can almost think of Fischer chopping off Byrne's left arm, right? Like in that famous scene in Monty Python. Why do I say that? This knight on h5 is really annoying, and it plugs the h-file, okay? Remember, we're in a race position. Okay, so this knight on h5, you know, to start out, white was attacking with two arms. Now he's really only attacking with one, right? The white's attack has kind of been ground to a halt. He's going to need to break this blockade on h5 to get this pawn going and to open the h-file. So this is a really key idea to remember in the Najdorf when you're facing the English attack, is if your knight is kicked, don't drop it back here. Okay, that might be your first instinct. Throwing it to h5 is often a really good idea because it really slows down white's attack. So white jumps into d5, which is, as we discussed in the first video, the one drawback of playing e5. The d5 square can be kind of weak, but that chunky bishop has that square covered. Bishop takes d5, nice move. Just taking the knight off the board. And after ed, Fischer plays rook c8. That's where the rook belongs in the Najdorf and in most Sicilians, right? Black's got this half-open e-file to work with where he can generate a lot of counterplay. Notice white doesn't have an open file for a rook to attack black's king. Meanwhile, as early as the first stages of the opening, black does. Well, again, welcome to the Najdorf. I mean, this is just the strategic trumps that you have in all of your positions. It's just awesome. So Byrne plays bishop h3, trying to activate the bishop, trying to pressure this knight, pinning the rook. But here's the problem with bishop h3, okay? We already have this knight on h5, plugging the h-file. Now white voluntarily puts another piece on the h-file, slowing his attack even more. So I think Fischer saw bishop h3 and probably was really licking his chops and looking for some kill shots. So he simply plays rook c7. Okay, let's maybe start increasing the pressure on the c-file, and we'll break this pin in the process. And white plays knight a5. Notice with the move knight a5, with the move bishop h3, white's really starting to play on the queen side, which is a really bad sign for the attacking player, right? You want to be focusing your tempi on your king side attack. The Najdorf player is the one that's playing on the queen side. So if you're trying to take operations on black side of the board and trying to get initiative over there, very often it's going to backfire, and that's what happened in this position. So Fischer drops the knight back to b8. Really good move. Okay, just cutting across any ideas of sinking this knight into c6. Fischer can just chop it off, no problem. And after bishop g4, attacking this knight, here's an instructive move by Fischer. Okay, he plays knight f4 in this position. The move that we want to avoid playing in this position is defending the knight with g6, okay? Because all of a sudden we'll get into a worse version of the dragon, right? We're going to play g6, giving our opponent a hook. He could even capture on h5 there and really start launching his attack on the king's side. So really nice play here by Fischer. Just throwing the knight into f4, okay? And of course, after h4, white could look to take this knight on f4, but, you know, again, this is a race position. This is a Najdorf. We're not really concerned by a mere pawn. I think the long-term potential of this unopposed dark square bishop, maybe envisioning it getting to f6, would far outweigh black going down a pawn, okay? Especially since this key diagonal would be opened up. So Fischer knows white's not really threatening to take on f4 in these positions. So Fischer plays f5. Really like this move, challenging this bishop, with the idea that after white takes en passant, Fischer recaptures with the bishop. Okay, look how this move, f5, improved the scope of this bishop. You can imagine a future e4, even if it's at the cost of a pawn, just opening up this bishop, which is just a fire-breathing dragon towards white's position. And in this position, white plays the move bishop b6. Okay, over to you. The knight's probably thinking, hey, I just played bishop b6. And I'm skewing your rook. I'm doing really, really, really well. Well, Fischer had a dose of reality for Byrne in this position. So, black to move. What did Fischer play in this position? Pause your video. So, congratulations if you saw the awesome move. Rook takes c2. Boom. An awesome counter shot by Fischer. After queen takes, black's down the exchange. That is no big deal in the Sicilian, okay? Especially if you're getting an unopposed dark squared bishop on this long diagonal in return, okay? Plus, Fischer got the pawn on c2, opening up the c file, which makes a future rook coming in the c file even stronger. So all around awesome move. And now you can think of this move basically cutting off Byrne's other arm, right? Like he's still in the game. His attack on the king side is gone. His attack on the queen side is gone. And he's just kind of stumbling around now, trying to kick Fischer, while Fischer's just having all the fun and dictating the pace of the game. So after knight c6, rook f7, Fischer wants to bring the rook to the c file, but of course the bishop on g4 is defending the c8 square, so he drops it down to f7 to bring it over. And after knight takes, queen takes, king b1, white needs to spend a tempo getting off this dangerous c file. Fischer plays classic Sicilian move, rook to the c file. And white has to waste even more time moving the queen out of the way. Both players shuffle around here for a couple moves. And after rook c1 challenging, black starts expanding on the king side. Nice move. A nice multi-purpose move. Giving the king, some safe haven. Challenging this bishop. Also, just blockading this h4 pawn. So Fischer wants to take a potential plan of white's of h5, h6, and just quash it here. Nip it in the bud. So after bishop e6, The king is checked, but no problem. King h7. Again, notice this nice handy move h5. The king is going to find a nice safe square on the king side. And after queen e4, g6, rook hg1, king h6. Stepping the king to this dark square diagonal, which is probably the safest position for Fischer's king here, seeing as white only has a light square bishop left. Okay, so the king stands much better on a dark square here than he would on a light square. So I think that's one of those moves that Fischer, remember this is a blitz game, just probably played instinctively, but it's a really good move. Okay, so we have rook c6. White tries to generate some counterplay on the c-file. Fischer exchanges and brings a queen into b6, hitting this loose rook on g1 and activating the queen on this really important diagonal. All around great move. After rook c1, Fischer captures on e6. And takes a moment to start some play on the king side, on the queen side, excuse me. Don't forget, Fischer's still the one attacking here, okay? If we look at the relative safety of the kings, White's king is in much more danger than Black's is. And specifically because Fischer, as is so often the case in the Najdorf, this minority attack with the A and the B pawn is just so quick. And normally White has a lot of weaknesses on the queen side that you can use to pry open the position. So a lot of threats on the board, a lot of stuff that Byrne has to defend against, basically. So after rook d1, looking to bring this rook onto the 7th rank and put some pressure here, we have queen takes c6. And after rook d7, Fischer defends. Okay. And after rook d6, queen takes f3, queen takes e6. I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay. So put yourself in the position of Byrne, right? The knight. You got a rook for a bishop. Okay. Okay, you don't have any arms, but you still think you're in the fight. You still think you're doing well. Well, Fischer in the next move gives him another dose of reality. And I say basically chops off one of his remaining legs. So over to you. What did Black play in this position? Pause your videos. The key thing to recognize in this position, and this is true in so many Najdorf endgames, is that Black stands better in this endgame. Okay, if the queens come off the board, Black is just better. Fischer recognizes this and plays the really instructive move, queen f5. And Byrne sidesteps to a2. If Byrne were to capture here, queen takes, g takes. This position, I think, is completely winning for Black. These connected pass pawns in the long run are going to be stronger than the rook. And White is just gonna be hard pressed to stop their advance. So that's why Byrne played the move king a2. He realized that. So Fischer said, okay, you don't want to trade? Well, now my queen is in perfect position to start pushing this really dangerous past e pawn. e4, awesome move. After queen e7, king h6, Fischer just takes a moment to step off the 7th rank so that his king is not pinned. We have rook d7. So, over to you in this position. I would say after this was Fischer's real kill shot. After this move, it was basically a matter of technique. So, White's threatening a take here on g7. What are we going to do about it? Pause your video. So once again, okay, black stands so well in Najdorf endgames. So it's really important that you train yourself to be able to pivot between a raging attack in the middle game, okay, which is how plenty of Najdorf games end, okay. Believe me, you're going to be checkmating your opponent. But you also have to understand, like, okay, now I can just liquidate into a completely winning endgame. And this is what Fischer recognizes here and plays the move Queen F6, exclam. Awesome move. And there goes Byrne's final leg, right? He's got absolutely nothing to attack with, nothing to do after this move. Okay? So mate is threatened on B2, and we have this tension with the queen, so Byrne is forced into a queen exchange here, which is exactly what Fischer wants. Now, look how easy this endgame is to win for black. A very common theme in the Najdorf. After rook d5, e3. Let's just push this past pawn, okay? Fischer's doing this not so much that he thinks this is gonna promote. It's more of a diversion, so that Fischer can activate his king and get some other counterplay going. So after e2, rook e3, bishop takes h4. This is what I'm talking about. Using this passed e pawn as a decoy, just so he can activate his king and get an outside connected passed pawn duo, which is curtains for white. After rook takes e2, bishop g3, king b3, h4, a4, takes, and h3. Byrne decide to call it quits. Okay, he could fight on and try to bite Fischer's leg off in this position, but he's got no arms, he's got no legs, he's got nothing to do. So it's an understandable result for the game to end here. So, really awesome game by Fischer. And if we go back to the beginning here, okay, this tabia position of the English attack. The key takeaway here is this setup by white might look formidable, okay? You might have played the Sicilian Dragon in a previous life before finding the Najdorf and have had really traumatic experiences against these setups, okay? But the bark is louder than the bite here. White just doesn't have a hook on g6 the way he does in the Dragon. It takes a very, very, very long time for white to generate an attack. And white has this illusion that he's doing really well. But in actuality, in my experience and in many games that I've reviewed, it's actually black that's having all the fun. It's black's attack that's quicker. It's black's attack that's stronger. Very typical for these variations of the Najdorf. Okay, so I really hoped you enjoyed this game. And if you haven't done so, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. You're not going to want to miss the future installments in the series. And if you want to elevate your chess game, don't forget to also check out my website, mvpchess.com. You can also get there by scanning the QR code below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.